Hello, everyone from Sweden, from Cyprus, from Romania, from Warsaw. Yes. Um, I think we can start our meeting. My name is Ursula Bios, and on behalf of the European Network Remembrance and Solidarity, I welcome all of you during our today's meeting. Maybe just few technical remarks on the very beginning. So your cameras and microphones are turned off because we're in the webinar mode. And it means that you can write on chat, but you cannot speak during the webinar. And the webinar is recorded, but without your data, so without your face or name. So our today's meeting will last 1 hour and 30 minutes. So we finish at 5:30. So just to start, there is our guest speaker with us today, Marlene Wokinga. She's a historian. She graduated from University of Salzburg in Austria, and she's an employee. She's a member of the educational team in Mauthausen Memorial. She used to be a guide from 2016, so you can imagine how many tour guides how many groups she visited to the site of the memorial. But she's also from 2022. She's a manager of a TikTok account of the Mauthausen Memorial. Hi, Marlene. Yeah. And there's too Natalia with us. She's my colleague from our office in Warsaw, and she will moderate our discussion on chat. And my name is Ursula Bios. I'm a historian and educator, and I'm the project coordinator for the High Story Lessons online platform. And there is last but not least our audience, so you, the participants, and I will want to start with a quick poll for you to vote. I will just display that, and the poll is very quick, so it's called "Who are you?" So just please, just please let us know, are you rather a teacher, educator, or employee of an institution, or just an individual. So just a few seconds for half of a minute to vote. The poll should be displayed on your computer, on your screen. Okay, I will show you the results. If you didn't manage to vote, you can always write it on chat. So we've got like 82% of teachers. The majority, I would say, are the history teachers. That's what I've seen from the registration forum. But also we've got some of you are educators, or maybe both teachers and educators. But also we've got people who are representatives of the memorial sites or museum or cultural institution or some others. You can write what kind of others you are, or just an individual who's interested in the topic. We welcome very much all of you during our meeting. And how we are gonna proceed. Just in a minute, I'm gonna share my screen, showing you a brief presentation I prepared. So this presentation will be sent out after the meeting. The format of today's event is rather an online talk, so I will ask several questions to Marlene. But we really encourage you to be part of this discussion, to write your comments and questions on chat. But after our discussion, there will be also a Q&A session during which you can save your question until the end of our meeting. Okay, so I'm gonna screen share this brief presentation of mine. Yeah. So I deliver some basic information to those of whom we meet for the first time, but also for people who already might know some kind of about the ENRS. It might be an information what we are up to in 2025 because we're still at the beginning of the year. The ENRS, it's an international initiative, an institution which aims to foster the dialogue about the 20th century European history. Here, those countries which are marked on yellow, those are our member countries, which are Poland, Germany, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia. But also we've got observer countries and advisory boards. And this map, if you consult our ENRS's website, it's interactive, so you can click on it and check our partners in your country. So I'm pretty sure that for majority of European countries, and not only Europeans, we have a partner there, and you can consult it on our website. So we've got like a bunch of different projects. Some are like purely academic. We publish, we have the exhibition as the outdoor exhibition you can see on the photo here. We also are holding promotional campaigns in social media, in outdoors. But here I just mentioned 3 different projects, which might be interesting for you as the teachers. So first of all, there is a Sound in the Silence, which is a project where students from 4 different European countries, they meet in one of the memory place. They have a series of workshops with artists like rap, poetry, or dance, or writing workshop, and then they prepare a final performance. It means it's like an art piece for the broader audience. And the goal of this History Through Art project is to show through art how they deal with those difficult emotions they encountered in a given memory place. So last year, the project took place in Pitești, in the former a prison of Pitești near Bucharest in Romania. In previous years, it also took place in Mauthausen Memorial or in Wannsee near Berlin. This year, because the call didn't start yet, but we're gonna inform you about that in the future in spring. It will take place in Pruszków and in Warsaw, so in Poland, and you're invited to apply with your school. The second project is dedicated for a little bit older, but still young professionals, let's say students. And within this project, again, a group of people meet in one of the borderlands. And their aim is to prepare a podcast on the borderland identity. And for example, last year we dig into the Finnish-Estonian borderland, so the sea border between Finland and Estonia. And this year we're gonna go with the students in August to the Polish-German borderland in Zgorzelec-Görlitz. So if you know someone who might be interested in applying, you can also do that to get more people involved in the project. And last but not least, if you are more as a professional into the memory studies, we're holding the European Remembrance Symposium this year. It will happen in June in Helsinki, because there is a 50th anniversary of Helsinki Treaty from 1975. So it's also a big event there. So you're invited to apply to come to meet us and just have a talk there. So now briefly about the high story lessons. This webinar we have now, it's part of the series of the webinar, which is called Methods and Resources for History Teachers. Our aim is to present different methods to add more resources to the website and then speak about them during the webinars. What we've got there, you can of course enter the website, but just let you know, for example, on the left, we've got the infographics about the Second World War, which is in Romanian, because the website exists in 6 languages. We've got animated lessons introduction. Here is, for example, a very beautiful short movie about Emilia Machalkova, who was a Roma survivor from Czech Republic. She founded a museum which is the only museum in Europe speaking about the Roma art like exclusively. And then we are trying to create our resources with the historians, but also with the teachers who are testing them. What topics are there? A lot of them from the 20th European history. There's a Roma and Sinti history, or the Holodomor, so the Great Famine from 1930 to 1933 in Ukraine, or resources on teaching history through individual perspectives. And now, getting back to, after this short introduction to our topic of today, so why we meet today? We meet today because on Monday, so on 27th January, there will be 80th anniversary of liberation of German Nazi concentration and extermination camp Auschwitz. We believe we wanted to have this meeting to talk about it, but also to provide you with different teaching resources, different methodologies, and with just thoughts you might have after our today's conversation on that, to be able to have a lesson on that. It's already on Monday, so there's not a lot of time for your preparation. However, maybe it might be just a good occasion to mention the fact that the anniversary is taking place on Monday. And speaking about the resources, there is no better place you can find resources on that as the website of the State Museum in Auschwitz, in Oświęcim. And then I'm gonna just show you the website, because getting there, you may have, after a quick read, you may really have a good introduction into the context, the historical context of the Monday's anniversary. So first of all, there is a very short article about the liberation itself, about the moment in which it happened and how extremely difficult moment it was, and how what preceded the liberation. So at the website you will read about how the camp has been evacuated months before the January 1945, how it has been liquidated, how the evidence of the crimes committed has been removed and were trying to be removed, and then the liberation itself in January 1945. And here, obviously, it's not the end of the story, because that's the moment when the fight for truth started. So it started long before, but it was the moment when people like discovered and could see on their own eyes through media coverage of what happened in Auschwitz. And it also led us to, which led later on to the international recognition of the genocide, to the trials, Holocaust trials, and then it is a very, very important context in the topic of our today conversation, so denial and distortion of the Holocaust. Coming back to the presentation, there is also at the Auschwitz Birkenau, at the website of the museum, there's also an online lesson dedicated to the evacuation and liberation of the camp. So after the meeting, I'm gonna send you the presentation with the links. So it can be read by students online, but there's also a podcast which is called On Auschwitz, and I think in the episode 23 there's also an episode which is devoted to the liberation itself. So I think it gives a really good context. This year, the director of the museum, Professor Cywiński, he said that the director Cywiński, he said that they won't be inviting politicians as speakers. There will be, and the anniversary is very, very much focused on the survivors, on the people who survived Auschwitz. There are less and less of them, but they will come there. So it's very, very much focused on the people themselves who experienced the camp. And just maybe as a to add up to that, the ENRS we prepared like the very short, like a 1 minute clip this year, who's devoted to Mieczysław Kościelniak, who created 300 drawings when he was a prisoner of the camp. Then he was evacuated to Mauthausen camp and then to others camp, and then he left through the war, and he was an artist like after the war too. So I think it's also a good starting point to speak about the anniversary, to show his story, his drawing, which are really beautiful and very emotional. And then at the high story lessons, getting into the Holocaust part, you will see 8 lessons about the topic. So you can also consult them, and you can see here like article, graphics, lesson plans, videos, and other resources which might be an asset to a starting point. There's also a teacher's guide, how to commemorate the Holocaust. So it might be just a 5-page read before starting. We also speak about the fate of children and the Jewish resistance in the context of the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto, but not only. So it might also be a place to start. Okay, so now I will stop sharing and I will move to our guest speaker finally. Mylene, maybe I'll start with the basic questions, because I mentioned your experience, like you started in 2016 as being a guide, and maybe it is obvious. Is it different now, educating about the Holocaust in this 10 years period? And if it's different, in what way?
Thank you so much for inviting me, and many thanks for preparing this meeting. I'm so excited that there's so many people who joined us, also from all over. It's cool to see so many people from Central Europe and Eastern Europe today. I'm looking forward to the discussion later. So I've been a guide for almost 10 years at Mauthausen Concentration Camp Memorial. Mauthausen, just as a brief historic thing, is located in Austria. It was the concentration camp on Austrian grounds, and it was a concentration camp with a very high death toll compared to other concentration camps. I've been working there as a tour guide for a while now, and my style of tours has evolved over the years, of course. But I also see that there's changes with the visitors who come. I can only speak for the small perspective of 10 years. I'm sure there's people joining us today who have many decades of experience in teaching, and you see all kinds of changes. I want to touch on 2 or 3 little things for now, and then we can go deeper into that. One of the changes that we see is from Mauthausen Memorial stance is a stance in our educational approaches. About 15 years ago, in the mid-2000s, a process was started and then realized to change our approach in teaching. For a long time, the idea of Holocaust education was very much centered around just talking about victims, to acknowledge their suffering, because so many people were not recognized as victims of the Nazi regime, and it took a long fight to have the recognition. But then in the 2000s, there was a bit of a shift in our institution to also include stories of the neighbors of the camp, kind of take a look at the bystanders or at witnesses, people who are in some way or another involved and in contact with the camp, and also to include a conversation about perpetrators. Why do people become mass murderers? How does that happen? And to look at that. And at first, that was something that was met with a lot of skepticism. some visitors, teachers who had come for many decades, they struggled with the new style of tour. We moved away from something that's more of shock pedagogy towards having conversations on site. But this is a change that I experienced about 10 years ago, where there was still more apprehension. And then now, after years of doing that, a lot of teachers are very much into that, and we get way less feedback on that. So that's one of the changes. Another change, of course, is time changing. Um, the generations shift a bit, and it's now maybe great grandparents of students who come visit us, or even of adults who say it's my grandparents who still remember the Second World War. So that is moving back, and there's more time between us. There's also a change with whatever happens in the world. And we do see people bringing those things into our educational setting that is mostly based on history and of the 1930s and 40s. But people raise topics that are important to them right now and bring them to us and want to talk about them and connect them to what we are talking about at the historical set. So there is always changing, and whatever is happening in the world also kind of like we get at the memorial site, just like teachers get in the classroom. And then lastly, one change that has to do with media is when I started working at the memorial, a lot of people visiting were taking photos. People are still taking photos, but now you see way more people also taking video. And that's an interesting shift in how we capture moments and what we do with those products. Of course, that's also a shift in technology, but it's fascinating to see maybe a change also in storytelling or documentation that is easily available to us.
So many additional questions I just wrote down. Um, That's also interesting in the fact because last year we had a talk on how to prepare students for a visit to the memorial site, and there was a big discussion between teachers and that like the better group is prepared, that it affects the visit itself, and it was there was also this notion to, for example, talk with students about the selfies. Is it okay? As a rule before going to a memory site to, let's say, okay, you can take a photo, but maybe not. Let's have some rules on taking selfie, on drinking, eating, on breaks or behavior and stuff like that. So yeah, so that's it. So but you spoke about the bystanders. Maybe just a second about that, because it's really important how it's shifted. Could you give an example of how to, how you introduce the perspective of the bystanders?
This is a wonderful connection to talk about preparation,
Yeah.
because it is important that people, when in whatever setting you come as a group to a memorial, there is some form of preparation. You can't just come and maybe your students are 14 years of age and they've just learned about the French Revolution, and all of a sudden they're confronted with the Second World War and they know nothing about it. And then they can't really put this into context, because there very much is a context to all of this. Um, we have prepared, for example, teaching materials that I'm gonna briefly show you. This is one of the things that we offer teachers to use before visiting the memorial or just in history lessons. This is a biography-based approach. All the little pictures you see here are biographies. They're color-coded, some of them. There's the life stories of almost 20 people, all somehow connected to Mauthausen concentration camp, and we really tried to get a very diverse group. What is wonderful about this time we live in is that there's an awful lot of teaching resources out there. If you want to find something, you probably find it on the internet, and you don't have to prepare a full lesson plan just by yourself and reading a book, but you can already use prepared teaching materials, just like the Auschwitz Museum has also prepared, and you showed us already. So what we've got here are, for example, the stories of people who were sent to Mauthausen concentration camp. This is the story of Emmanuel Garcia, who was in Mauthausen. He was a Spanish Republican. He survived the camp, and he actually survived the camp. And there's little pictures talking about his life that students can get engaged with, and there's also a whole biography connected to him that students can read. There's a lesson plan with that. They can then find at the very end a timeline and further questions to talk about in the group, little tasks already prepared. I'm gonna show you two or three other biographies. One of them is, for example, of Johannes Grimm, who was the manager for the German Earth and Stoneworks Company, and he was actually executed after the war for what he had done in the camp and his involvement in Mauthausen concentration camp. You see, all of these illustrations also offer an interesting approach maybe to students. In this case, we don't work with historical photos, but with drawings done by artists of the University of Vienna. One more is that's the wrong one. Is the story of Ahmed Kranzmeier, who was a child living near the town of Mauthausen, and he actually was a black kid who was a victim of the sterilization programs that the Nazis did. And he lived close to the concentration camp. He was interested in the Hitler Youth, and students then get to engage critically also with this idea of like complex stories. They are not just one story and one person, but there's many different things coming together within one person, maybe. And maybe they can find themselves there, and there's a whole bunch of nationalities in there of people from Poland, people from POWs from the Soviet Union, Austrians, people who survived the camp who didn't, who worked as guards in all different kind of ways. And we find great success with that because students get a form of connection to a person, but then they also have questions to engage with, which they then also can, when visiting a site, connect to the site. And what I've also found from other study trips is that once you have a connection with the space, you then go search for it and you wonder, was this person here the book I read? Was this person here maybe? Or not? And that's an into history, because we do struggle sometimes to get people interested in a story. And we ask the question, why is it important? Why do we talk about this history? And it's one of the ways to maybe catch someone's interest.
Thank you very much for showing that. And I think it's really interesting and valuable, and it also might be, I think, easily adapted to the fact that we've got people from different countries here, and it might be difficult for students to read in English, but they can see the photos and they can engage. And yeah, I think it might also bridge this gap of interest because they've got individual stories, and on the other side they've got those big numbers, because you talk about you speak about the death toll was so big. And yeah, but I believe that after when starting, maybe not starting, but having an individual story, then you move to the numbers too, isn't it? Is it somehow at the end, or like, maybe that's a
Numbers
specific
are very
question.
difficult to understand at
Yeah,
times. If we're
it
talking
is.
about 6 million, I cannot imagine 6 million
Yeah,
people in like as a visual maybe. And we're talking about such diverse group of people as well. Um, because Jewish people in Warsaw experienced something very different in the 1930s than people living maybe in Munich.
yeah.
So trying to capture all of those different things and both making it simple enough, but then also complex enough. That is, of course, one of the great challenges of teaching.
Yes, yes, of course. Um, and you spoke, I think, as a third things that people are brought in, like people things which are from the present to the education. Um, And I'm just curious, are you open to those questions as the educators? Are you rather like you're just having this distinction between past and present, or they somehow or let them interpret the history in their own way, or you're open, like, to have a discussion on that?
There's one big thing that always limits our discussions, and that's time.
No.
Um, a lot of memorial visits are timed. Well, there's not enough time to see everything, to talk about everything. And it would be wonderful if we had multi-day seminars a lot. Most of our tours and workshops last for about 2 hours, maybe 3 or 4 hours. There's a limit on that
Hmm.
side. Of course, when you're in a classroom, you can have multiple discussions throughout months or years even. But the memorial as was for many years apprehensive about this topic. Why should we allow discussions of current topics? It is difficult if tour guides maybe somewhere, just like teachers talk about politics. But about 5 years ago, we actively challenged that idea, and there was a shift also in our work to have more of those moments and encourage pupils to connect past and present, and to not do that in a completely simplified or maybe wrong way, but to understand changes in time, to understand bigger concepts that could be maybe concepts of these ideas of us and them that have been talked about in psychology before or in sociology, and that we can connect throughout different genocides. And this is maybe breaching into the field of comparative genocide studies that have been developed for decades now, to see that there are things within societies that can change, that are steps towards a genocide. These can be different things, of course. Another example of making connections from now and then is to use source analysis and maybe more approach history teaching also as getting skills. Because
Yes.
one of the things you mentioned, numbers, is knowing numbers and knowing things that happen, but then also having the skills and doing an analysis of photo and maybe dismantling propaganda and how it was used. And then you can also apply these skills to things nowadays. And there is also one connection from past to present.
Yes. Yes, of course. You can also share on chat, because I think the topic is also very relevant for teachers, how it looks in the practice, disconnecting past and present. Is it an asset or is it a challenge for an educator? Um, I think that maybe let's try to touch the topic we've got for us. So the denial. Um, I maybe it's a general question, but do you think that it's widespread when, like, knowing from people who are getting to your memorial, do you think that it's widespread, that the denial is rather spreading, or this is some kind of margin?
Mm. There are certain narratives of Holocaust distortion that are widespread, so they're not full out denial,
Yes.
but maybe the whataboutism
Yeah.
of saying, but what about the bombings of Dresden or something like that? That is more
Yes.
subtle, maybe. Um, Outward denial is less common, that people are outspoken about that in the group setting at memorials. That does not mean that those people don't
No.
count. Maybe they don't speak up, or if they do, they also want to have an audience. There are, of course, I say it is normal to me. I don't know if it's normal to other people who don't work in this field so extensively. Um, We do have a lot of graffiti at the memorial. In Austria, it is forbidden by law to draw a swastika somewhere to deny the Holocaust. So the police comes on a regular basis to take a look at our visitor book, where people can leave a message. And sometimes it's a wonderful note that people leave about never again, or about family stories. But sometimes they also put hate in there or try to spread Holocaust denial, or they put their Snapchat name in there. So we deal with all kinds of things, and this is something that we face on a, I want to say, weekly basis, maybe monthly basis. Um, I cannot speak for all of
Yes.
Europe to see if there is an increase in Holocaust denial on total. What we do see in recent politics, of course, when I'm thinking about the AfD in Germany, for example, are these steps of complete distortion and Alice Weidel claiming that Hitler was a communist, which is absolute nonsense. And battling those is quite the challenge.
Yes. Yes, it is. Um, yes, because denial isn't always explicit. So it's not always that it might be maybe easier that there's someone who's saying that it didn't happen, but it's like it might take this like a subtle way. Yes, to as you said, to whataboutism. So that there are like plenty of other things, and why we should specifically focus on the Holocaust. Um, so in this case, like you mentioned also the comparable studies between the genocide. So it's not the fact that the Holocaust researchers or historians, they're saying um, that it was the only such event in the past, because there was a huge discussion on that, how unique was that experience, isn't it?
Exactly. And it is not about playing down um, genocides that have happened or playing down the immense horror of the Holocaust. It is about this, or it came from this idea of never again, because we have been challenged many a times, I'm sure, as societies, that in the 1990s, when the genocide happened in Rwanda, people were shocked. Or when within the war in Yugoslavia, people were shocked and they were not sure how to react to crimes taking place and to wars and this horrific spread of violence. And then we look at history and we try to find lessons from it. And this does not mean when we're putting those in relation to each other that they are in any way less, but that there are connections that we can see or similar patterns to
Mm.
be aware of that maybe help us in this idea of never again.
Yeah. And like this year, it's the 80th anniversary of the end of the World War and the liberation. And because like so many years has passed, do you think that do you observe that there may be less or more people who are interested in? Are they like in the number of the visitors? And then I will switch to, maybe we'll talk a little bit about the social media too, but maybe about the visitors.
Um, of course, it differs within regions and countries, but for most of German and Austrian memorials, we have a rise in visitors throughout the last couple of years. I know this is true for Auschwitz Memorial as well,
Yeah.
that there's more and more people coming. Of course, the pandemic was a little bit of a glitch in
Yes.
between. We also see that we are offering more and more tours. So more and more people come and they're guided by us and they use memorials and those institutions as tools of learning. Um, there is an interest and it is seen as important by far, like in general, and we also see curriculum changes by national curriculum to also include this topic as a lesson plan. Sometimes that is just a very quick burst, and people and teachers are thrown just into the cold water with that. Sometimes it is very important to have that there as well. Of, and when we look at studies, we see that young people as a generation, when we're talking about Gen Z, so people above, below the year of 20 years of age, they are the most interested generation ever to engage with the Second World War history. And coming back to what we talked about in the question before about denial and maybe also anti-Semitism, what we experience in Austria and also many of the German memorials who I'm in close contact with is not that there's new forms of denial or new forms of anti-Semitism that we're faced with. 95% of all the hate, of the denial, of the anti-Semitism we're facing, they're using old narratives. They're the exact same old narratives, and they go through the ages. It's not just young people, it's not just middle-aged people, it's not old people. They are just there, and that's what we're still fighting. And maybe it's also saying that some of these things, they are just still there.
Yeah.
And were never eliminated. So there is interest. There's not a lack of interest. We see really cool projects also emerging. There's also energy behind like our organizations to foster this kind of education and engagement.
Yes, thanks for this reply. Okay, so let's maybe unpack the social media part because Mauthausen Memorial TikTok. So could you just maybe start with that? Why you decided to go there? Yeah, maybe that's yeah.
About 3 years ago, we went on TikTok. Back then, we were the second ever memorial to join TikTok. There was a huge debate. I'm sure some of you are aware of other social media platforms as well. Like 10 years ago, we talked about joining Facebook or Twitter, and then people like Pavel from the Auschwitz Memorial, he was like really big on joining Twitter and doing some cool stuff there, and then others joined too, and we're like, now, okay, maybe we should use this space. Of course, there's apprehension because Holocaust education is such a serious topic, and the platforms are seen as fun. But by now, 3 years in, I'm kind of sick of that question or the debate. Not your
Sorry.
question. No, no, not
Sorry.
your question.
Yeah.
Of the debate of whether we should use those platforms because there's so many people there. And we know it also in a negative way of how we talk about, for example, TikTok and the potential it has of radicalization. But we see how many people can be an audience and can be in touch with stories, histories, or institutions. And that's why we're using it. And just to give you all a brief insight into how we're doing that, because there's many different forms of media and videos. I would like to show you one
Yeah.
video of ours. Oh, I cannot.
You should be able to screen sharing.
Yes, but I cannot do it with sound. Huh.
Does
I'm
it
gonna
make
show you
sense
the video.
without sound? We can also send it in the email after the meeting.
I also know what I'm talking about, so I can just do a voiceover.
Yeah.
So we're doing short form video. We're doing video clips that are about 30 seconds to maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and about all kinds of topics, as you can see here. We're doing videos on movies like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, on what age should you be when you visit the memorial, or on dismantling ideas like the one you see on the far left-hand side of the screen that says Arbeit macht frei. A lot of people come visit Mauthausen and they think that every concentration camp had such a slogan, and this video is just saying this was not the case.
Yeah.
So it's about also using the ideas that people already have of such a site, and then maybe saying yes, this is the case, or dismantling them, or to give them little historical information. There's one video that we did where I'm standing there and I'm talking about a barrack, and it says, this is a barrack of what it looked like in 1942. It is one of my favorite tools to use in a tour right now because you can actually see the beds, you can see the common room, you can see the washing rooms and see what the prisoners went through in their everyday life. Because nowadays, the barracks, they are empty and you need to use your imagination to understand what they're like. So this is very short. It's usually me who is the in to the video. There's other people who interview survivors or who use testimonies that were recorded by the Shoah Foundation or by the institution and show them. We decided to use me as the face and as the somewhat young person to connect with the audience and be the point of interest as someone who is invested and interested in this time to then also offer other people maybe an interest. And as you can see, some of our videos, they have a lot of views. Some have like about like 5, maybe 8,000 views. Some have like 80,000 or 800,000 views. So it's very different,
Mhm.
video to video. And we've had great success in that. Just today, I was doing a tour at the memorial, and then there was from the other group, it was one school of students from the other group. A couple of kids came to me and said, "Are you the TikTok lady?" I said, yes. I said, "Cool, I've seen you."
Yeah.
And that was the interaction there. But it means that they, in their everyday life, had already in their like private sphere an interaction with this history, and we're there and are maybe open to conversation and can answer questions. And it seems important to be approachable.
Yeah, I think that now I've seen that before, but I think that it somehow also bridges the gap between the young people, because what we can do with this history, how we can interpret it, so we can there will be some who won't be interested at all, a group of students who the teacher would try to approach them, but they wouldn't be approachable because they are not interested. And there is another part of the story when the only thing we can do with this history is to commemorate, is to remember, is to treat it as something which is really so it is unapproachable. It is kind of, holy. We cannot really touch it. We cannot approach it because we need to stay serious. It's of course it's serious, but we need to stay, very still towards that history. But it's also a knowledge there, because there at the or already at the like reels you show, there's like so many things to know about the camp itself, about the memorial. Not only to go there and to feel it as the emotions, but about the like ways the living conditions, and how they spend time in the camps and stuff like that. So I think that the knowledge is something which is like neutral and it's pure, I would say, isn't it?
Yes. We have an awful lot of very good sources and knowledge about the events of the 1930s and 40s and around them. Of course, they can be framed or misused as well. We do see those in national contexts. As an Austrian, Austria for a long time said we were the first victim of Nazi Germany, even though the facts said something quite different. And it took a lot of times and discussions and people who were engaged and were searching for truth and were using the knowledge that is there to challenge those ideas. And that's also something, because our conversation is also about anti-Semitism and changes in history teaching. That's something that we can base conversations on, and that we always must have there. There are just facts that cannot be debated. 6 millions cannot be debated. Um, and then you need to also use the relationship and the person, because history teaching, it really goes hand in hand with, like, if students are interested, yes, of course that's important, but then also what a teacher brings to a lesson, but then also what the surroundings are like. If they come from a family that is um, maybe very racist, has a lot of ideas about the world and an ideology, and that they give that to their kid, a history teacher can also only do so much. There can be one point where someone gets different ideas. Same with a visit to a memorial. At a memorial, we're spending 2 hours, maybe a day with students. For some of them, there is a new point that they're seeing. Then they get introduced to new perspectives. It cannot ever change their whole lives. 2 hours are not going to change someone's life if they are maybe radicalized or in a very extreme society. And then we start teaching, though, by using some facts, using that, building on that, and giving different viewpoints.
Yeah, I think it's okay, but knowing that, we know that there is like, that's because students, they are using social media also to prepare themselves for the lessons, so to take all their knowledge, and like not only students, but like a lot of us just, refused in somehow how to read traditional media, and they just taking all the information from social media. So how is there a way you deal with disinformation, which is widespread there on the social media? So I think in different contexts, for example, other people who are posting things which are denialist, or people who are commenting on your post, and like it's hard to tell what's the truth there. Yeah.
I'm gonna split this in two. One of the things that is something that we can do in teaching history is what I've already talked about questioning sources and knowing where to find information. Knowing where to find information also means we're Googling things, or we're putting them into the TikTok search bar. Wherever people search for things, it is then a tech company who makes a decision on what to show first. And we need to hold those companies accountable. And for example, the new European Digital Rights Act, I think, is calling accountability to delete misinformation or to not show it at first. And there are huge campaigns that are also, for example, in cooperation with UNESCO, that TikTok has done to show facts about the Holocaust. This is also when we go on Google, because it is showing us search results. And if it's showing us Wikipedia, we might use it as a resource that we decently trust. If it's showing us as a first result, because we click on that a lot, Metapedia, which is a right-winged Holocaust denying platform that mimics Wikipedia and looks very legit. But it says that Hitler was a great politician. That is then really, really difficult to battle with, because we get sucked into our little spheres and bubbles. So this is not only about the social media platforms, but about where we get information from in general. And it is something that we, in a digital age, also need to teach youngsters as well as adults, because adults are just as much of a target there, or can be can use sites of misinformation law. So that's the one bit. The other bit is, of course, what we see on social media in terms of things that are being posted. That could be on TikTok or Instagram, also on Facebook and all the other platforms, of videos that are giving misinformation. And this is where the platforms once again need to come in and be aware, use moderating systems, and delete that kind of content, because it is spreading hate, it is spreading misinformation, and it really works against what we try to do, like we, all of us here. And the other thing is that me personally, as the one who is moderating our account, I need to read through all of the comments, because people are posting all kinds of things, and I do not want to have comments there that are spreading denial.
Yeah.
And that is helped by some of the platforms who are already filtering comments, and you cannot type certain things, or other users also flag and report comments so that they're not even shown. But then still I have to go in. And there we're once again at the subtle thing, because when users type in the Holocaust didn't happen, that's one thing. That's like kind of easy to spot, also easy for a moderator to spot. When people type in, I'm sad this isn't open no more, under our videos, that means they like the idea of mass murder and concentration camps. But you don't really see that at a first glance when you just read the comment, I'm sad that this site isn't functioning no more. So it's really nuanced, and there's a lot of different codes that neo-Nazi groups use also to spread denial. Like, you wouldn't necessarily pick up that a pen, like like that, the emoji, is Holocaust denial, or that an emoji of wooden doors is Holocaust denial.
But
But
it is
they
somehow
are,
related.
it
Okay.
is related. it claims the wooden doors emoji, for example, is just a little code that is used by Holocaust deniers to say the gas chamber doors were made out of wood. This is not something obvious, but
Okay.
when you get hundreds or thousands of comments like that, people gather and put those there. They're like, okay, someone is trying to spread a message. And
Yeah.
what they're doing is not necessarily showing the message to users who have no idea what this is about,
Yes.
but to use people
To
who
the
already
group.
know
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
and to strengthen them. And this, on the other hand, is also what we're trying to do on social media. We're trying to form positive communities and strengthen people who are already invested, who already have an interest and say, yes, this is it's so cool that you're interested in this history and want to learn about this and use this and talk about maybe also current times. So please also feel our strength and our positive will to not just fight something, but also really boost an idea of what we want in the world and how we want to live.
Mm. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't expect the wooden doors. Yeah,
It's
it's
super
really
random, and you really need to
yeah.
keep up to date with those things. And at first, you don't understand, and then you Google, and then you ask other people who are also on social media, and like, have you gotten this? What is this?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I think that it's 5 p.m., so we still got 30 minutes. And I would love to move to the questions. So just think about your questions. I'll just open up the chat. Marlene, you can do that too, because there are some comments. I'll try to look for the question.
And someone
Mm.
shared that in Greece, they're finding a lot of shocking denial and distortion.
Yes. And like the situation in Romania is not better. So Italy here. Right today, since I'm studying Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice with a year 12 class, I show them a brief excerpt from Mein Kampf to demonstrate that the anti-Semitism is old story. The insults, Strauss and Shylock are the same used during the Nazis. It's a chatty class usually, but today there was a deep silence. That's
Right.
inspiring.
It's so cool that you made that kind of a connection. Sometimes we see things as very like as just one event happening in history, and we don't see maybe the connections of what came before and after.
And it's aligned with what you said, Marlene, that is a very old stuff that that we like the young generation might be blamed or might be in the spotlight, or we can say that they just spend all their time in social media, so they're just getting more and more fake information, but actually the pattern is really similar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at at beginning of discussion, bring in discussion a number of 6
Yes.
million person regarding the raising of the far right in Europe again, how we can get to the majority who deny those numbers. Careful, not the Holocaust, but the numbers of victims.
Yes. There was also something going around, I think, right now that is just the people claiming there were only, I don't know, 217,000 victims, something ridiculous like that. It is a big challenge. One of the things that is so very draining, it takes so much energy, is to keep an open conversation, to still be open to talk with people. There are things though that we cannot tolerate and where a red line is crossed. And in some cases, of course, a red line is drawn by a law regarding Holocaust denial. And it is also a question of how do we reach those people who deny the numbers or the extent of atrocities. One of the things that we get in a teaching context in school and also at a memorial is that there's a lot of people who have to go to school and they have to engage in the classroom. and there is an opportunity to grab their attention, to teach them something. So this is something that one really can like take in as opportunity. There are a lot of people though who we don't reach. Usually history teaching stops at the age of 14 when people leave school, or 15. Maybe some go into higher education and they have more history teaching, but the majority of students don't. And then trying different forms of engagement, being open to um, yeah, different forms of engagement uh, on a whole broad sector is there. There is something that maybe you also feel, which is a bit of a worry about media consumption. There, if there's no big, maybe national news outlet that people engage with and trust, but they're getting all of the information through online sources, maybe very um, limited perspectives there as well. That is a huge danger to democratic societies. And I don't know where this is going to lead us. We see those shifts in some countries, and it's something that maybe we need to be wary about. Um, that was not a solution to your answer, to your question, though, because we struggle with that.
Yeah, I can add to that like putting the numbers in the central numbers of victim in the central point of the discussion is always very tricky and very complicated, because there are several of memory conflicts on the numbers. There is ongoing memory conflict between Poland and Ukraine, for example, on the Volhynian massacre. There are others where it's really hard to define the numbers of the victims. The historical like status quo and like discussion between the historian led to 6 million Jews victims of the Holocaust. And this is also answer to Karina question, is are Roma included into the 6 million? I will just speak briefly about the Roma. And I also see that I know that if someone doesn't want to believe, sending a link to an institution, I don't know if it helps, but I see from that we researched one from which kind of sources teachers are using to research for the teaching resources. We had a survey on that, and we discover a very simple fact in that teachers too, they are afraid of the disinformation which is widespread on the internet, and the majority of sources they are using, they are such as a website of United Nations, a website of their governmental webpage, or the website of the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum. So like the very trustworthy institutions they know. So not, a web page from the internet, but if there is an institution behind that information. So it also might be an advice for the students who are looking for the sources. If you've got, of course, there are biased information produced by the big institutions, but if there are some things we can lay on, like the really institution who research that, it might also like a background. Do you want to, Marlene, maybe just briefly about the Roma, that it's and Sinti, this is complicated because the researchers, that's why I said they're not right about the number of the victims. Some of the sources say it might be up to half million of Roma and Sinti victims, but it's all complicated because they were not like registered in the same way before. They didn't have papers. They were not, they were not in the databases, a lot of them. Yeah, so that's for the numbers of the Roma victims.
Thank you for adding that. That was very good. There was also a question about bystander approach still. One of the reasons maybe on why we talk about bystanders or witnesses, people somehow involved in the crime, but not clearly in a category of they're the victim or they're the perpetrator, is because it's such a large group of people. And because there's some of them who enable violence, there's some who just witness it, there's others who also have stories of resistance and try to intervene. And there may be even more of an interesting group when we talk about a scope of action. So what do people do? What choices do people make? In most of the instances in our lives, we are probably bystanders as well to something or a neighbor to something. Um, it is also battling some ideas. For example, it is battling and dismantling the idea that that was put forth after the war, that people didn't know about the camps, for example. And then we talk about, yes, people did know, and actually more than that. They had connections in some way or another, for example, economic connections. They sold something to the camp, or they had relations with some of the guards, maybe, or when we're talking about the concentration camps, or they witnessed deportations, or they had a profit because all of a sudden their family had a better flat to live in. So these little things that also make up the answer to the question, how was it possible that in Mauthausen, 100,000 people, or all over Europe, millions of people were murdered within a civil society? And that is the approach there, to talk about scopes of actions and involvements of people's and decisions people make, because trying to look away or trying to just live your own life is also a decision you make. And it's going into this idea of making people agents, like things they do, and not just very passive humans. And maybe also helps us to, in our lives, be active humans and participants and not see ourselves as completely passive.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe some of you heard there was a famous movie, The Zone of Interest, in 2023. So a movie, like a historical drama about the Nazi officer who was living, like the chief officer who was living near to the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, and it shows like everything, how they, gardening, how the kids are playing around, and how the family is like behaving in this close vicinity of the camp. So it also might be a good watch. So, and Stefan, you wrote that in our school we put a strong emphasis on the question of the sources and the algorithm of search engines, and you're starting in the sixth grade, so I think it's really valuable to start early because it's a skill, so it requires time. Okay, so many questions, Marlene. So, did you pick something, or shall I read?
We can also, I think Sorin talked about how the question of how teaching about the Holocaust is affected by similarities between Nazi speech and nowadays politician speeches.
Yeah.
This is something that we can, I think we do in many points in history courses when we analyze speech and we try to dismantle narratives and storytelling. And of course, this then connects to us nowadays when we look at a speech that maybe Himmler gives or Hitler gave, that we then all of a sudden find similarities in what politicians use nowadays. And these can be just strategies of a speech. But of course, when we look at the ideology or arguments that are raised, we then see some politicians also using the same arguments, or spreading hate and calling for violence against minorities or certain groups of people. And it is very important to name those and name those as wrong. I'm not sure if we always need to make the connection to the Second World War, because it's sometimes, what's the phrase? It's beating a dead cat. You're using an argument to say this is like Hitler or like a Nazi speech, which, yes, yes, you can make that comparison, but maybe also to say this is not what the human rights stand for. That's not what we as a society, I in my beliefs and morality want to stand for, which is, I believe, an even stronger argument to drive that. Because otherwise it's an historic comparison and we can compare many things. But there you have this very clear thing where one says, this is not what I want in the world and what, for example, the Human Rights Declaration says that is what as nations we've decided to do.
Yeah. Okay, but we've got other questions on that. So maybe I'll try to pick up this question. So how to talk about the war in Gaza, about the protests of young people all around the world. It is something young people think about at the moment. Do we have any guidelines as teachers, educators, curators? We thought about it before, also before this
Yeah.
meeting, because it's like it's around us. So maybe Marlene, some thoughts on that.
Do we have guidelines? Yes. There's different institutions have put out guidelines um, or maybe best practice examples. One of the big issues, though, is when we think about it, we then also need to put it into practice. When we have a classroom of students and you know the students, you can have that discussion maybe in a different form than when it's just online and on the internet or a theoretical discussion. You know where your kids come from, what they're thinking about, what they've learned about. Um, One of the struggles that we're facing is people calling the violence in Gaza a genocide on Palestinian civilians, and then maybe using that as a starting point to talk with students about what genocides are and when they get defined as a genocide. Ursula, you talked about the Holodomor and how long of a time it took to recognize the famine as an act of state violence and a form of genocidal action as well. So maybe using those historical reference there to base our discussions nowadays on. In some of my tours, I do talk about the idea of never again, meaning that never again means to never become perpetrators again. Never again means no war. It's not to become a victim again. This is the idea that Adorno put forth to not become perpetrators or allow mechanisms of perpetration again. And then sometimes students get outraged or they raise their hand and say, but that's not true. There's war right now. And this is something that we're faced with in the world. It is really cool if students have political awareness, if they're aware of what goes on in the world. Um, the framing then maybe is a struggle sometimes. One last thing I'd like to add is sometimes it's interesting to see what kind of narrative students put forth when they talk about Gaza, what they see, and maybe then it's also a conversation about where they get the information from, and maybe go into that direction. In the other thing that's interesting when we look at current situations in Israel and Gaza is a connection to or a disconnection from history. Some teachers find that right now some students they really want to connect the past and the present, and it's connected for them. And when they, for example, talk about Jews, they're talking about Jews back then and now, and they make that connection to the past with their current topics. Sometimes we also find that there's a complete disconnection. And this is something that one needs to find out when you're having that conversation. Are they talking about people living in those areas right now? Do they in any way make that connection to the past? Because some students don't, and they don't know what they're maybe then talking about now is also connected or not connected. So that's important to understand where people are coming from to then maybe guide us in that conversation. And when we're talking about ongoing wars, that's also with the war in Ukraine, but also other things that we've gone through in the world recently, it is unsatisfying to not have an answer or to not just immediately be able to stop it, maybe. And that's something that we um, to live with. Often as history teachers, we are asked about the truth, and it doesn't exist yet, or there's no solution to it, maybe.
Yeah. I think it's also, thank you very much, Marin. It was really meaningful, and that there is a clear difference between the memory and the history. And I think it's also so history as something which really happened in the past, and it requires from us to have these facts about the 6 million, about what and against the denialism and all the things you can read because of the anniversary and stuff like that, and the memory which is shaped on daily basis. And I asked Mahdin before our meeting how to deal with that question, and she said like that in 2015 people were asking about the migrant crisis, and in 2020 they were asking about the COVID. Then they asked about the begin when the war started in Ukraine, the of course the acceleration of the war, but in 2022 they were asking how to perceive those events in the light of the Russian invasion. So like the word is not stopping and like the fact that you mentioned Elon Musk's greetings, so it's like I had during the last week impression that like history is really everywhere around us, and like students they're asking, okay, but what's the big deal? What was the salute? How it was rooted in the past? So I think that that we can somehow help them to understand, even though it's like really it got very complicated.
Yes. Um, when we when we talk about current crises or events happening, there's some that are easier to talk about than others. And it's sometimes easier for us or more comfortable. And I think that's a problem. They're comfortable to make a comparison to the past or a connection. Where there was something when in 2015 the refugee crisis happened, where there was kind of funny um, incidents, because a lot of in German the word for prisoner is Häftling, and it sounds a lot like Flüchtling, which means refugee. So just when talking, students would confuse the word Häftling and Flüchtling, prisoner and refugee, and they would confuse ISIS, which in German is called ES, and then SS. And there would be little slip ups. They were kind of a Freudian slip almost. And then and then you kind of need to catch yourself doing that. And you're like, oh, actually, I'm making a connection because I see something happening somewhere. And then it also relates to this, or I'm just confused about words. There's, um, it was maybe when we're talking about things being more comfortable, it felt more comfortable to hear someone say, when the war in Ukraine started, that Putin is like Hitler. This is easier as a moral stance to deal with, because one is like making connection for someone you dislike to another thing you dislike. You can easier find that when we're talking about what goes on in Israel and Gaza, we see something that we still feel tension there, because we don't have a final answer and it's not as comfortable and easy. And we as teachers are also a bit lost maybe sometimes. Um, when you talked about Elon Musk just now, this is something that we will, in the next couple of days, for sure, talk about in the classroom, if we haven't already. And in the memorial, I was asked about it just today. And those are the current things that come into the schools, into the classrooms, into student tours. Um, and they challenge us. We need to adapt. We need to find information on that. We do our research, and that's something where, as teachers and educators, we're really challenged. We can't keep up on all the current forms of anti-Semitism. The wooden doors, that's not really relevant in a year. And there is a lot to learn and keep up with, but it's also okay to sometimes not know. We are not an embassy. We don't have to have an opinion on everything.
Mm.
And that's also something to maybe sometimes use and say, actually, I don't know yet. And to
Yeah.
not know is something that students also dislike when they seek advice.
Yes, yes, because like everyone's looking for a statement, as an embassy. So we've got the official statement, what we're gonna think about it, but it's really hard to produce somehow. I'm just gonna maybe read some comments because we are just running out of time, and I want to really finish in 7 minutes. So there is a comment. I'm concerned with teacher students who prefer to withdraw from moral relativism. We shouldn't judge people in the past; they didn't know better. They're hesitant to challenge denialism or conspiracy theories in general, and I'm trying to figure out why they feel this way. So I mean that we shouldn't judge people in the past; they didn't know better. Okay, so I think it was about the bystanders, that we shouldn't judge the bystanders, or yeah, that's the moral relativism is it's a threat, I think, that it's a challenge too. Now I'm gonna just read, and there was a comment about the taxi. I teach at the university about Holocaust from the philosophical point of view. I know how to do it, but how to explain things to a taxi driver who tells me that there is no such things as the Holocaust, and I have 10 minutes to address that. Um, do you want to somehow comment on one of those, or maybe just a close? There was also a
Yeah.
question about the Albania, which I won't dig into because it's kind of complicated, but I really recommend you to read the story of how the Holocaust in Albania. It is very unique for like a European scope, the Albanian situation, and like a reason of pride too for the Albanians. And you asked also about maybe I would just post in I sure some no, I posted to the host and panelists, to everyone. So the 10 stages of the genocide model, because we talked about how to define the genocide. So it's really it might be a good tool to think about the stages to the genocide. And for example, we had an exercise in Wannsee. They had an exercise where they just put all the stages to the genocide, and they asked students to arrange them in this, from first to the end, and it causes a lot of discussions because there's somehow it overlaps the stages of the genocide. Um, yeah, it was your comment. Thanks for clarifying about the perpetrators, even. Yes, so without defining the guilt of the perpetrators. Um, yeah, I think it's also a very much it depends on the context, because I'm Polish, and for our perspective, it's like the victimhood, which is the like the main narrative. So like the role of the perpetrators, it's kind of, but also it stops us from yeah from different things. Yeah, Marlene, would you maybe would like to
Yes,
wrap
I'm
it
gonna
up?
pull some of those together into one last thing.
Yeah.
Um, the comment about Albania and also what you said now about Poland, that's one of the things where countries differ so much and societies differ so much. And when you from a different maybe religious background or a migrant background, you have different interests in that. World War means also that the world was involved. So every background has some form of an in. And even though a national story might be dominated by one narrative, there is, you find all of them in there. There were perpetrators, there were bystanders, also in Poland. And you can connect those. It is also important to not pull them out of, to distort the numbers, maybe, because there are some very clear narratives. And it's so cool to also focus on stories like Albanian stories of resistance and help, which are unique, and it is there where we also find strength. And this is now connecting to the judgment and the morality of things. We do judge. We do judge people in the past. It doesn't mean that we need to attack them or anything, but we do judge, which is good, because this is also the judgment we get to say that the mass murder of people is bad. There is judgment there. And it is also where we're defining our own moral, political stances. We decide what we think is moral, what is not moral, what we would like to do, how we ideally would like to act, or maybe what is the realistic way of how we're acting in the world. So this is the idea of using history to maybe play around with what happened, what people kind of do, and then also apply that to us and maybe us right now and our future ideas to say, actually, these are some things that I don't like and that I don't want. For example, me, I would not like to live in a dictatorship where I can't express myself freely. I like those values, and that's something we define through history as well. Um, and there is that is judgment, and that's okay. The other thing though, and this maybe brings us back to also the discussion around current politics and also Gaza, is what terms do we use and how morally charged is our discussion, and is that then really historical informed or not? There have been many instances throughout history where the term Holocaust has been used as a political term, but also as a moral term, or maybe one that tries to grab attention. And every time there are then discussions on, is this correct? Should we do this or not? Maybe it's also to scandalize, to grab attention. During the AIDS crisis in the 1980s in New York City, some activists used the term Holocaust to talk about the lack of action by the government towards the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And that grabbed attention. This is also something that's different throughout cultures. In the United States, there is, in general, in language, more often the term Holocaust is used to refer to something that we find completely horrific. And it has become this moral measurement. It is also a moral measurement that has been used for many times of this is kind of the worst thing that humans can do to each other. At the same time, we struggle with this idea. And for example, in our German-speaking context, and I believe also in the Polish-speaking context, Holocaust is not necessarily used in that way. And that's where maybe we also have conversations to have to juggle those different usages of a word, and also define if we find that okay or not.
Mm.
And as a last little nugget, I find it very hopeful actually to use history to try and use different perspectives and explore history to then also talk about our present days and define what we would like, and kind of in a more positive way and framing to see what things have happened in the past and see if there's things that we enjoy, if there's things that we don't enjoy, if there's things that are problematic or things that we can actually learn from, and see those stories of resistance and where people came together and helped each other, for example, or thought of really cool things to then also apply to us nowadays, and to use that as a kind of learning through history, not about, but using that as an into our nowadays.
That's a great closure. Thank you very much, Marlene, because it was really insightful and it covered a lot of topics. There are no easy answers, really. It's not that there, even if you spend 100 years of working, there won't be easy answer. But you covered it perfectly, and thank you very much for your input. Thank you very much to our audience, because you were very active and we really appreciate your question. I know that we didn't answer to all of them, and just to briefly, a last one thing I'm going to show you is that the one remark that I want to thank the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because there was the founder of this webinar, and due to their funding we could meet. And the last but not least is that we had a contest for young people, not only for young people, but for the older one, which is called Grandparents and Grand Stories. And this is about the history of how the life looked like after the 1945 1945, after the end of the war. And we prepared like a really short clip. I'm gonna send it you over an email, and it's very moving in my opinion. It very much it very well presents the like what we can gain from talking to our grandparents. So we are really very much encouraged to discover like the family stories. Yeah, so there's apply until 15th of March. I'm gonna send you that over email. It might be a bit rough, my email, but I just want you to have it everything before, as soon as you can have it before, even before tomorrow. So I'm just gonna put it everything into an email for you to have the links. Natalia sent you over a chat the link to a short survey. I would really much appreciate if you could fill it in, because after the 8th of May, so the anniversary of the 80th anniversary of the end of the World War, so 8th of May, we will be developing a teaching set on the communism, and we are looking for like your input, what should be included in this topic. So thanks again. I'm looking to chat. There's like thank you too for your comments and questions, really. And we really appreciate, I always appreciate how, you know, in your free time after a school day, you just decided to join us for, you know, for enrich your learning. So it is really congrats and thank you for being here. Yeah.
Thank you once again for moderating this discussion. It was very nice having a chat and seeing everyone like be so active in the chat. That was a great event for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. It was great because of your input and our participants. Okay, I think I'm closing. Yeah, just write us an email if you need something from us. Have a nice afternoon.